Nintendo recently released a full interview with some key members from the Nintendo Switch Sports development team. It is packed with interesting information. We get a look at the pre-release avatars, why it's coming out now in the Switch's lifecycle, the initial college sports theme, and they have also let slip on the total amount of cosmetics that are coming in the first year of the game, which is wild. Sit tight and stay to the end for some crazy designs. Now let's dive into the 10 most interesting things we've learned from this Q&A. One of the biggest revelations to me from this Q&A is that the development for this game started not too long after the Switch's release. Yoshikazu Yamashita, the director of Switch Sports, was directly asked to develop a Wii Sports sequel by Koizumi and put the team together from there. And development got to about the halfway point, but they were kind of focusing on making it as stylish as possible without really putting in the substance behind the sports. This focus ended up leaving the sports with much more complex motion controls, and they deemed it to be too far away from the core thesis of Wii Sports, and they restarted development. A year or month that the restart happened hasn't specifically been given here, but it's really good that they did focus on that thesis, which is of course making this game the ultimate pass and play game that anyone can join in with. This kind of reminds me of the Metroid Prime 4 situation, except the key difference is that we knew about Metroid Prime 4, whereas we hadn't previously been told about Nintendo Switch Sports. I'd argue that if we did know about Switch Sports coming and then they restarted development, we would have got a similar update. I think it's really good that in both situations they've taken quality over deadlines, because frankly I don't know how fussed I'd be in a Switch Sports game where the sports are brushed over. The substance of this game of course is how good those sports feel and how competitive it feels, and so they really honed in on that, and I think the delay was worth it. Now this one is especially relevant to my channel, and it confirms something I've suspected for a long time. The team behind Nintendo Switch Sports seems to be comprised of some of the key players from Ring Fit Adventure. The game is developed by Nintendo's Entertainment Planning and Development Department, just like most Nintendo games, but specifically it's made by Production Group 4. This is typically the dev studio that deals with the more out there Nintendo titles, including motion control focused ones. The program director for Switch Sports was Shinji Ushiroda, who was also the program director for Ring Fit, and the sound director was Natsuko Yokoyama, who was also in charge of sound effects for Ring Fit and has worked on multiple physical activity titles. Now I find this super interesting because there's a lot of experience there developing Ring Fit. There's really intuitive motion controls, and that experience brought over to Switch Sports would really have helped development. It's interesting to see that experience being brought over to Switch Sports, albeit by the timelines it sounds like there are multiple teams in EPD4, since Ring Fit would have been finishing development while Switch Sports started. So what exactly does that mean for Ring Fit Adventure? I think we'll table that discussion for a little later. While we're talking about teams, the Q&A revealed that even though the producer and director were from the original Wii Sports series, the vast majority of the development team is actually new to Wii Sports. It's over 90% in fact. Even with the Ring Fit experience, and of course it's not to say that it's exactly the same team who worked on both. There could have been people new to the team for Switch Sports, and people could have left the RFA team, but it's interesting to see so many fresh eyes coming onto the series. This actually plays into one of the lines in the Q&A where they speak about how when it came to Wii Sports, they kind of run out of ideas, whereas with Switch Sports, having the fresh set of eyes allowed them to do different sports and expand upon what they already knew. It really shows what a fresh set of eyes can do, because I really like the sports that have both motion and button-based controls, like soccer. It's really different and feels refreshing after swinging around for a while. Yoshikazu Yamashita did note that the disconnecting experience made production a little harder than he imagined though. Now the Q&A states that they are working on new cosmetics for the game after launch, and outright says they're releasing new items every week for the first year. They do say 10 per week, although there is an asterisk next to that number, which I assume means that the number is subject to change because it isn't outright stated in the article. But this means we're potentially having up to an additional 520 items from launch, including the initial item cards that were available on launch day. And that is a pretty significant amount of cosmetics. It's all to do with getting people to play online and collect them as an end game to the game aside from Pro League, which confirms my own thoughts from before launch. Did you know that Wii remotes and JoyCons are very different? Obviously, but they were more different in control than Yamashita initially thought. Naturally, they had to build the motions from the ground up to emulate the Wiimote closely, as the director wanted a similar experience to Wii Sports, and this was difficult because of the different weight and method of motion detection that they have to Joy-Cons. Essentially, everyone held a Wiimote similarly, and it felt roughly the same when they swang, whereas Joy-Cons are smaller and lighter and can be held in different ways in the hand easier. This contributed to differences in motion detection during development. They later go on to say that motion motion detection isn't 100% perfect, which, you know, it's difficult to get 100% perfection, but it is as close as possible, and that it was pretty easy to get up to 95% detection. Junji Mori, the art director for Switch Sports, made a really interesting point about the Mii characters and Sportsmates. Owing to the models, there are a huge amount of extra motions required for Sportsmates to flow smoothly. The Miis had around 30 different motion animations based on the motions that were available to them, whereas for the Sportsmates, they needed over 650 different motions. Basically, the arms and legs created a massive amount of additional work, and there were walking animations and running animations for everything, so it just really added up and really increased their workload, so it's such a huge disconnect between the Miis and the Sportsmates. Now, when Mori talks about the game, he mentions that the minimal amount of animations looked fine for the Miis, owing to two factors: lower screen resolution and the setting of Wii Sports. With the Switch, it's implied that the higher resolution, as well as the potential Mandela effect of people remembering Miis having arms in Wii Sports, which for the record, I had. I really remembered arms in Wii Sports, and they don't have arms, and it really shocked me, like, relearning that, which is strange considering the sheer amount of hours I put into Wii Sports. Anyway, it is implied that these two factors were key in their choice to make human-like characters that ended up being Sportsmates that were not Miis. It's not explicitly stated if they were told not to use Miis or that they actively decided against Miis early on, but considering their addition, it may have been to do with the need for arms being too against what the Miis are. Unfortunately, it's not really clear in this interview, but I'd argue that higher resolution gameplay as well as the different environment of Spoko Square played a massive factor in why Miis were not at the forefront of the game. It does kind of make sense when you see how well Sportsmates suit Spoko Square. Coming as a shock to a total of 0 people, the focus of Switch Sports is to be a multiplayer game that you play with people. Owing to the evolution of gaming since the Wii, the main focus of this title is the online mode, because that means you constantly play against people. The cosmetics were put in as an incentive to help people play online and feel like they were having fun even if they were losing. Now, the offline modes are for playing with other people locally, of course, but it really does genuinely sound from this interview that they disregard the idea of people playing single player, which is incredibly disappointing to hear. It does kind of explain the lack of offline content, doesn't it? They weren't really focusing on people playing it, and when they were expected to play with friends, so the extra modes weren't particularly necessary. So it does put some doubt in my mind as to whether we'll see things like 100-pin bowling or speed slice in the game in the future. There were issues developing the Joy-Con programming to accurately determine correct directional swings for badminton, which is a key part of the sport. And in order to differentiate it from tennis, dev team specified they wanted to have swing direction be more dominant for putting the shuttlecock into position. Timing is more important in tennis, as shown with this really cool image, but that's not the case in badminton. Now, remember how earlier I said that the weight and accurate motion detection of the Joy-Con affected development? Well, their way around this was to employ a deep learning machine to develop optimal inputs for directional swings. This was done by getting hundreds of different examples of different people swinging the Joy-Cons in certain ways. This helped them develop more accurate motion control detection without the need for the Wii sensor bar or anything like that, which is just so interesting. There was a lot of playtesting for those swings. They were doing 200 left and right swings per day, each day, to test out the different effects of the current code. Final fun fact, we have a look at the original designs for Sportsmates. They designed characters from the ground up and had a theming of the game as intercollegiate sports. Personally, I really like these designs. There's a lot of personality in each character. I don't exactly know how it would translate to a moving 3D model, but as far as the design goes, pretty damn impressive. Really interesting though as well is this concept art, the college Sportsmates playing a huge competition like an ancient Olympian stadium. It's very different from Spoko Square we know and love, and it was eventually deemed too far away from the pick up and play thesis of Wii Sports, which is why it was dropped for the shopping mall / warehouse aesthetic we see in the final game. This is meant to feel more accessible to more people. But in development there were also some other designs that were non-college, and it's kind of the only place that I can really put them here. So they were going to make players control robots. So the character is up the top and you were controlling the player who was controlling the robot who was playing the sport, which has quite a few steps to it, and it was because it's deemed a little bit too complex that they decided to steer away from that and go for a more human-based character, which is like your avatar, you controlling them directly. Now, the really interesting thing is that there is actually like a working prototype of the robot character in the game, which is awesome. I really want to see that. So, you know, hashtag release the robot cut. Now, what do you think of all of these awesome bits of information from the Q&A? I really like the read, and it's quite gratifying to have my theory about cosmetics being the endgame being proven true, considering I got a fair bit of resistance to the idea. I also enjoy the look into how they program the motion controls and the techniques used to get it to be as accurate as possible. It seems like a lot of love and care was put into this game to get that accuracy and to make players feel like they were playing the sports properly. I'd really enjoy like a full look at the composition, as well as a definitive answer as to why Miis were not selected for the game, even though I'm pretty sure from this interview we can garner that it's to do with the environment. So let me know which your favourite fact was, or if there's anything that you found really interesting that I didn't mention. And also say hi to Deedle. Deedle is adorable, and he's staying with me for a few days, so I just wanted to show him off. He's really cute. You're a good boy, aren't you? Yes, good. Cool. Thank you so much to my patrons like Rain, I Love Waffles 1311 and Sick Hippie for their amazing support that they give me through Patreon. I really appreciate that support, really means a lot to me. Now jump on over to the next video, my bowling guide on how to get strikes every time.